Welcome to the SIWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with our new guest host, Sean. Sean, how are you doing today?
Oh, doing fantastic. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So Sean comes to us with a background in education and speaking and a whole bunch of other things. So Sean, if you were to summarize what you're up to these days, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so my main day job is working with CP Ontario. I help business professional students learn about the designation and learn about career paths. We really walk them through both the academic process, but a lot of the career readiness that they need to be able to explore all the careers that are out there and some of the skills they need to discover, to market themselves, to build new relationships, to build a professional profile and presence out there to be known. And I also work with a company called Skills Camp that does soft skill facilitation, which complements some of the own work that I do. I'm really passionate about learning and professional development. So I do soft skills training workshops with students and businesses really across the world.
Sounds good. And obviously that it was a journey to get there. So I'd love if you rewound the clock and went back in time and talked to us about Sean as a kid. So what was Sean like growing up? What were some early fond childhood memories?
Oh, I grew up, in the 80s in suburban Mississauga and really had a quite privileged childhood. I mean, had kids on my street. I loved my school. I did well naturally at school. Things sort of came to me, so I never really struggled there. And was lucky enough to get into sports. And so there was lots of opportunity to play, a lot of freedom to play. I don't envy my kids and this generation because there's really is that lack of that freedom to explore and play. We're definitely trying to make that possible. But my parents both worked in the evening. So, as I came home, I sort of fed myself and really just thrived under abundance of independence where, we would roam the streets and go play street hockey and bike tag and all of this and tennis and all this fun stuff. So, my childhood was a good one. In elementary school. And then as we got into high school, things can be really challenging for people in high school. I'll admit that I did struggle socially during that time. It's an awkward time for everybody. And it really kind of drove, this really, deep need for, building community and belonging that I took with me to post-secondary, where, we'll talk about that probably in a future question, but really things started to come together for me post-secondary, and it had a lot to do with that driving force of, having a wonderful childhood where I felt part of this great community. Then all of a sudden things in high school just weren't clicking and weren't fitting. Right. And that was kind of a major driver towards what was a priority for me in my life as I went to post-secondary.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the freedom growing up earlier in the 80s, 90s and stuff like that, right? Kids growing up these days, it's so hard with all the pressures and all of the social media and all that sort of stuff. I don't even know how I would manage if I were to grow up in this area. But folks are managing and hopefully can learn some lessons here. I'd love if you walked us through a little bit of that journey into the awkward high school time, right? Because I think that could be helpful for a lot of folks. What were some influences along the way? So as you got in from elementary and transitioned to high school, you mentioned a few kind of challenges and struggles. I would imagine they're fairly common for most folks, but sometimes to just experience it with other folks and normalize it would be helpful. So talk to us a little bit about that experience and some of the influences along the way.
Yeah, I think what happened was, as you evolve in life, there's certain kind of rules to the game. There's ways to thrive and grow. And I remember as I got towards the end of elementary school, I had a lot of praise coming at me from the adults in my life and the teachers, whether it be, success or, sports and things like that. And so I ended up, I think, cultivating an over sense of depending on other people for my validation and my identity. And I took that to high school where, people can be quite cruel. And when they see that they have that power over you, they really leverage it. And so as you start to feel like, oh my gosh, this isn't working, you become more desperate to get that type of affection and attention. And the only way you know how is to sort of lean into and double down on the process that got you there in the first place. And so, I think I was really insecure and I really struggled because I wasn't happy with myself. And I was letting other people have control over how I valued myself and that sense of self-identity. And I think that is very, very common for young people. And my goodness, like I didn't have social media back then. I can only imagine how that's exacerbated now. And so, it was almost kind of like being this form of incarceration, this form of being a prisoner to other people. And they had all the power in my life. And I wouldn't look back and regret it, because it really did set me up for this sort of great, emancipation that took place in university, where I found myself and realized that, I was happy with who I was, and I'm a good person, and I need to build, happiness unconditionally from within and not from other people. But yeah, I think that was a real struggle. And it's hard when, somebody says something to you that, is just designed to hurt you or bully you or make you feel bad. And it's how do you not internalize that? It's already a really hard time. And, again, I have 2 older sisters that are 5 and 10 years, so they were long gone at this point. And so it can be quite a lonely time. And I only had wished that I had looked elsewhere for the people, because they were there. There are communities available there. There are people that are longing to be friends and make connections. It doesn't always have to be with whoever you think at the time is like the most popular of the people that you idolize and want to be. I really missed out on some of those great friendships, because again, that insecurity was really driving me towards, if I'm going to get approved, if I'm going to be valued, it has to be with these people. And the more I did that, the more, the cycle continued.
Yeah. And during that time, were you more kind of the loner type, where you like to keep to yourself? And because you mentioned that you wish you had reached out. And if you can share a little bit of that, and then also the process to get into university, because obviously as someone who felt like a prisoner or trapped, that can't be a very great feeling to have to navigate your career alongside.
No, I mean, it's, as someone that is an educator, I can tell you that, students simply just can't thrive academically when they are not feeling well themselves, whether it's anxiety, whether it's difficulty at home, whether it's they haven't eaten, whether they're being bullied. And so I found that my academics did sort of struggle towards the last part of high school. I was also pretty lazy. I didn't love the idea of coming home and doing homework. When you're in elementary school, the teachers are always checking your work, right? So,
sure.
And you have the opportunity to do most of it in class. But when I'm there at home doing things independently, and my parents are working at night, not checking on me, things could end up sliding a little bit. And it's easy to justify the fact that I don't care too much for this geography assignment when I'm just not feeling that sense of belonging, connection. And so that's why that stuff can be so impactful for students when they're going through it. So in terms of applying to university, I had always known, my dad was an educator, and it was always very, pressure that you have to get into university. And, at the time it was either, it was just a perception. Now, of course, he was born in the 1940s, so he grew up with this, but it's this perception that there's like 2 streams. And if you go to university, then you're okay and you're successful. And if you don't, then your life's over and there's no hope for you. And so there was this tremendous pressure. And he would always say things like, my first year university, my first class, a professor raised a glass and said, here's a toast to the 2 of you, the only 2 of you that are going to pass this year. And I'm just the whole time thinking, oh my gosh, even if I get into university, how am I going to possibly get through it? I've just all these nightmare stories about how difficult it is. And so, I managed to just cultivate this self-sense of, what do I need to do to get across that finish line? What is the, how do I put the, the least amount of energy into the most amount of results on this geography project so that I can at least get like a mid-70s to get across the line. So again, I know I had the ability, but it was more just the motivation at the time wasn't there because of so much of that social struggle that I was feeling and that loneliness.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds pretty common for most folks, right? Because a lot of it, you're going through the motions like, will I really use this geography, history, this whatever that I'm doing? I mean, for certain paths, absolutely. For other paths, maybe not. So when it's not down your chosen path, then it's a little bit more difficult. And it seems like that the path was chosen for you a little bit to go down that education route. So talk to us a little bit about that decision. Was it like, thou shalt go to this school and take this program, or were there a little bit more flexibility, or how did you make that decision around?
Yeah, so at the time we still had grade 13, so I was one of the grade 13 students who was applying, and at the time it was, let's look through the university magazine and guidelines and find the ones that have the lowest level of admissions entry average requirements. And I won't mention which of the schools that I applied to, but there were a few of them around Ontario, and I did get into some and not others. But it so happened that King's College, University of Western Ontario had, I think, like a 72 average at the time, and I was just above that. So they were the ones that I applied to. I didn't know anything about them. All I know was that I was really hoping to be able to go away from school and not have to live at home, because I mean that experience, however mythical at the time from movies and pop culture, to me at the time, I really wanted to live on my own and have that experience. And I'm so grateful that I did.
Yeah. And talk to us a little bit about the experience, because you mentioned that high school was a little rough, and then university is where you start to flourish. So where's that path where I guess you started peeling back the layers, opening yourself up?
The first month of university was really overwhelming. When I first noticed, right as we pulled in, as part of our orientation week, and I know I've seen a little bit of that around still today in campuses, but I really was so much more back then, where instead of these upper year students who are there to intimidate you, or create a negative environment for you, it was these upper year students saying, "Welcome, we're so happy you're here, and you folks are the best, and we want you to have as much fun as we're having, and we want to bring you in and come do this with us, and come do this, we're going to take care of you." And it was like, holy cow, I never realized that such a world could possibly exist, that people could be kind and celebrated for kind. And then, it was one of the benefits of being at King's College, King's University College, as it's called now, is that it was this sort of smaller size, best of both worlds. So you got to live there and take your classes there, but you were still part of Western as well. So it allowed you to really be part of this community where you got to know people very quickly and build relationships very quickly. And it was mind-boggling to me that the social hierarchy now was no longer, about who could climb to the top and who was the most popular. It was a hierarchy of who's the kindest and who's the most open and friendly and positive and funny, and it was like a paradise. And so at the start of it, I struggled a bit because I was bringing that old framework and that old how to. If people are going to like me, then I better, say these really impressive things and show them and talk about me all the time, and realizing that I was just, again, trying to do the same thing of getting people to choose me and validate me. And it was a couple of friends that really took me under their wing and said, "Look, it's you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. You're okay. Right. You're fun. You're a nice guy. So just let people know how nice you are and start caring about them and not so much about yourself." And then it just clicked. And so that kind of turning around and focusing on others and building community, and being authentic and not requiring anything back was just this incredible liberation. It's hard to describe how liberating it was. And then halfway through the year, my parents actually got separated, and that was kind of a shock to us and the family. And it really, at that moment, now became clear. It's like, okay, well, this person in my life had always put this crazy pressure on me is now sort of left. And it was like, okay, now I'm really in the driver's seat of my whole life. And I was fully prepared for this, having gone through this recent emancipation, going, I can't control all the things that happen to me in my life, but I can control my reaction to them. And realizing I'd spent my whole life trying to do the exact opposite. There's a Buddhist saying that there's a person that tries to protect their feet when they walk, so they try to cover the world with leather instead of putting on shoes. And it was like, oh my gosh, I've been spending all my energy trying to control what's out here, and then I'm forfeiting the only control I do have. And so bringing that in, just it made me really feel quite intrinsically happy and motivated, and I thrived as a result of it, because people want to be around authenticity and happiness and people that want to give and bring joy. And I could really see that being the case. So I quickly became someone that I wouldn't trade places with anyone in the world. I was really quite happy. And that momentum has continued to this day.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love so much of what you said, where talking about like covering the world instead of your feet. I think that's so important. And for a lot of young folks coming in and realizing, well, it's really the only thing that you can control is yourself, right? Everything else, whatever happens, but your reaction to it is really what you have the control for. And just a change in environment can do wonders for folks. So for those that are trying to contemplate, well, how do I change, be different, or do what I want? Maybe a change in scenery might be helpful. The folks around you, what came to mind was that adage, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? So it seems like that you kind of upgraded those 5 with the hierarchy of kindness around you and folks that are willing to see you and allow you to be yourself versus forcing you to play this role and being something that you're not. So it sounds like that was a fortunate turn of events and you end up becoming starting to become the person that you are right now. I'd love if you shared a little bit about now that you have this kind of weight lifted off your shoulders, this new found identity that is truly you, what was the path like on graduation? Because you did get into education right when you started. What was that like?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember at the time thinking, I could have gone into teachers college right away. And if I did, I would have been fast-tracked into a teaching job and had a lovely long teaching career. But I always thought, even though being a teacher sounds great, I would always hate the end of August so much because I'm going back to teaching. And so I said, I'm just going to hold off for a while. So the idea was, it's time for my adventure, right? I'd worked and saved some money over the summers and I wanted to go on an adventure. And so I'd actually had won in a raffle 2 Greyhound tickets anywhere in Canada. So I thought, here's what I'm going to do. After university, I'm going to work my summer job overtime. My friend and I took this road trip around the US, and then I was going to get on this bus and take these bus tickets. So I went to Western one more time just to say goodbye to people on my way out. And on a Friday night, I went to one of the restaurants there, and I ran into my future wife. And so I ended up going to BC. So I ended up sticking around to date her because, obviously I think she was a great catch. So I was like, we're just going to stick here for a few more months, see how this plays out. And obviously things got quite serious. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm sticking here. Now I just need to find a job. And I graduated with some little bit of arts background and religious studies and was looking for just something out there, and again, things were different back then. This was 2002 where, a university degree was enough to get a good entry-level job in business. So I landed a job at Maple Leaf Foods in procurement in IT. I didn't know anything about the stuff that I was ordering at the time. They're like, order 512 megabytes RAM. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I'll cut and paste it and I'll send it to the vendor. The vendor sends me a quote. I come back. Is this quote good? Okay, I'll put the purchase order together and did that. And so, that transition worked smoothly because, of course, I was prioritizing trying to, build a relationship with my wife. And now I was making money. I was like, okay, well, we can put travel off later. Maybe that's something I'll do with my wife later on. So at Maple Leaf Foods, worked there for about 2.5 years in a really traditional sort of office setting in a cubicle and in mid-Mississauga. And I just realized there's something more to this. This is not where I want to be. This is not the track that I'm on. And I can really see how slippery this can be to, I'm comfortable here. It's the devil that I know. So why not just stick with it? Go to maybe a manager track and then take your 6 Sigma courses and skill up. And I just thought, is this what I really want? And it was nagging at me. So that's still kind of brought me to the next junction, but I don't know if we want to head into that part yet.
Yeah, I'd love if we dove into that. But before we did that, I want to just chat a little bit about landing that job, because you mentioned, in those days, degree was enough to get you a job. Was it as simple as applying? Did you have to do what you're kind of involved with, like attending networking events and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, good question. It was through a personal network. So my roommate through Western, his older sister was a recruiter for a tech company, I think of CNC Global. And normally they have tech positions through help desk, people in the server room, people in different technical capacities. But this was a job that they were recruiting for that doesn't really need a technical skill set. It's just more of a transactional purchasing analytical skill set, more of a relationship building one. And so as a recruiter, you're always looking for people to fill the role. And so she knew through her younger brother that he had a bunch of friends that just graduated, and she reached out to me and said, would you be interested? And I said, sure.
Yeah. Sounds like a pretty...
I got lucky.
Well, I think it's lucky, but also taking the time, because a lot of folks and students, they'll just mass apply, send hundreds and thousands of different applications versus sometimes talking to your roommate, right? For me, it was one of my friend's brothers. They were looking for a role, and sometimes it's just as easy as that, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So don't sell yourself short in terms of relationships, roommates, classmates, and all that sort of stuff. Just reach out and reconnect with folks.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
With that, I'd love if you kind of went into the the next journey? Because I know you decided to teach abroad. How does one come to that decision after having a fairly comfortable life in a cubicle for a while?
Yeah, my wife had done a lot of traveling, even in her high school and university years. Her grandfather worked for Air Canada, and back then you could get these family passes on standby. So she did a lot of traveling, and just talking to her, being inspired by her, and thinking this is something I really, really want to do. I want to go while I'm young, have this experience, go and challenge myself, and break free. And it was hard. It was really hard because I was worried. I had some student debt that I needed to still pay, and like, what's going to happen over there? I've got the steady income. Can I come back? It was, and I kind of felt at the time that, maybe I won't be able to get a job so easily, but no, we took the plunge and we did it. And it was the best thing we ever did, ever, by far. We were supposed to go for 1 year. We did a total of 5 years overseas, because it changes you. It changes you in so many different ways. You become so alive. Mm-hmm. You're getting off a train overnight from some city, and you're coming out and you're in, Luang Prabang, and you're looking around and going, okay, where am I? How to get to the hotel? And you're looking through your guidebook, and it's, trying to speak, trying to communicate with people and using sign language. And then you go and you discover this really cool restaurant, and it's magic. And there are, of course, some challenges that you have to overcome as well. And, but it just allows you, every weekend, we would say, like, we're putting our feet on ground that they haven't been on before. Mm-hmm. And, I looked at my day yesterday. I went downtown to the office. I visited a university. I went over here to the Starbucks, and I came home. Like, everywhere I went, I've been before. Like, when's the last time you put your feet on ground they haven't been on? And the other thing too is you build these incredible relationships, because the people you're with overseas become like your family. They're your friends. They're your support group. They're your people you celebrate Christmas with. They're everybody. And so, being a friend with someone overseas for a month is like a year back home. And so you develop these incredible relationships, and it changes you. You come back to Canada, and the biggest culture shock by far is when you come back and you realize that there's so many parts of the world and so many ways that people do things differently, that, our way wasn't always the best way, and I miss the way they do things. And, you miss that feeling of being so alive and being so aware and being so excited that all you want to do is watch travel shows now and then get the airport as soon as possible.
Yeah. That sounds like an amazing experience. And this is one where I always thought of doing that, but I think it's one like, well, do I want to do it at this point in time? Probably not. It was one where in previous years or previous lifetime I might have, but not now. I'd love if you shared a little bit on that, the actual decision, because I think that's one where folks are challenged, because they go through that, like, I have student debt, can I come back and get employed and all that sort of stuff, right? Those are ones where, like, was there like a tipping point that actually said, okay, this one thing, or the culmination of these 5 things that said, you know what, this is why we're going to do it? Yeah,
to me, it was, actually going back to that real transition at first year university, I realized I had discovered very early my biggest fear. And my biggest fear in life is that I'll have regret. And there's a difference between regret and, something like, I made a decision with what I knew at the time, and it turns out if I had known this, then I would have done something really differently, right? Like, Aaron, I will say our regret was we should have gone to Korea 2 years sooner, because I was afraid of leaving Maple Leaf, that we stayed 1 extra year before we actually left. And when we did, we ended up being in Korea during the financial crisis. So much of money that we had saved in Korean dollars, right? So, we would have had a different experience then. But at the time, you got to be satisfied of knowing with the cards I had in my hand and the knowledge I had, I made the best decision. That's all you can do. But to know that, I really want to go overseas, but I shouldn't, well, you got to just take the leap and do it, because it was more like, even with, like, thinking about having children, I'm like, I'm not really sure I want to have children, but I know I'll regret it if I don't. So let's do it. Right. So, I knew in my heart that if I didn't take that leap, it would bother me. And the thing about regret is there's nothing you really can do about it besides learn for the future to make different types of decisions and calculate your decision making differently. But once it's done, it's done. And so I didn't want to look back in university and realize that I graduated university and I hadn't done it all. So that's why one of the reasons I thrived so much is that because I was so afraid of regret, I went to as many clubs as I could. I met as many people as I could. I stayed late in the cafeteria to chat with people. Like I didn't go play video games. I wanted to just be it all. I wanted to do everything I could so that I graduated. Like I could not go back and do anything differently. And so that's what drove me to go to Korea for the first time, is that I've known a few people that have done this. They've said it's life transforming. I know that in my heart that this track, I don't know what I want to do yet with my life, but I know it's not being a purchasing analyst at Weekly Foods in Culinary, Mississauga. So that fear of regret is what drove me to make the decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and nothing against the folks at ML Foods and purchasing department. They're all great people too. And I like how you've kind of approached it from the regret side, because I think that is one of the fundamental areas where, I mean, when you're young, like you don't think of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a book called something to the effect of like the regrets of the dying, and that's things like this where I wish I traveled more, I spent more time with family and things like that. It's not that I wish I worked more, I made more money, that sort of stuff. Those are not usually, it's more these other things. So a good, I guess, decision-making concept for folks to think about regrets in terms of that, and not so much of the, if I knew more information, but more like these fundamental ones, because there's probably a handful that you really want to do, and you make sure that before end of life or end of career, whatever it is, that you make those ones. So I think that's an important takeaway. Now, so you've gone through this transformative experience, you're still alive, and then you come back to the real world, or whatever you're calling it now. Like, how is that process, right? Because why didn't you just continue living on that forever?
Well, because we weren't certified teachers at the time. So after 2 years in Korea, we realized we love this. Like we should have been teachers all along. Being teachers is great because if we're a certified teacher, not just a university graduate who's teaching English as a second language, but if we actually a certified teacher, then we can continue this travel lifestyle, which we love, get way more time off, and get paid way more. So let's go to teachers college. So my wife and I both applied to teachers college, and she got in and I didn't. So then we thought, okay, you know what? We're young and we've been hearing all of this. You've got to follow your passion, right? If you could win $10 million, you never had to work again, but you had to do something, what would it be? And for me, my passion was food. I love food. I love cooking. And I thought, okay, well, we've been watching a lot of celebrity chefs on TV. Let's go to culinary school and see how this goes. So she goes to teacher college. I go to culinary school. And it becomes pretty evident pretty quickly that this is a really challenging career. We're talking 70 hours per week, really challenging conditions. You are working late evenings and weekends. I'm a social person now. I've made all these great friends at university. I can't imagine not seeing them, especially when we're coming, when you go to and from overseas and you're back home for a couple of weeks, like you just are on hyper social mode, right? Building those relationships again. And so I realized, I'm like, this is not going to be the career for me. I mean, the nice thing is I can still cook and I can do that as a passion. And so we said, okay, let's go back to Korea one more time to figure it out. And during that year, I finally got into Jesus College. So then we came back again. I went to Jesus College, and now with both of us having our teaching certificates, it was time to go teach at a international school in China. And then we were there for 2 years, again, enjoying an amazing life of travel and teaching. And so, so again, a bit of a bumpy road, right? I didn't get in right away and thought, okay, well, is this really going to be for me? And think, no, this is what I want to do. I want to enable myself to travel and to make some good money doing it. And so we just kept applying until I got back in. But I think, again, we're just trying to trust that gut. It was hard. It was hard because I paid a lot of money that I'd saved for to go to culinary school. And I did complete the year. But it was a real sort of reality check as this young, naive person thinking, oh, just follow your dreams, do whatever, feels good. And then realizing, okay, well, sometimes that works out for people. And they realize, yeah, this is it. I thrive in that 70-hour week intense. And a lot of people do. But for me, it was like, okay, I didn't. And I look back now and go, that's viable. It's viable learning. It's very rarely do I talk to someone that every step they took was a linear pathway. That just doesn't exist. And so I had to really learn to accept that decision as saying, like, not, it's not a failure. It's a step where I had to learn, and now I don't regret it. You know, I may have gone back and regretted not going to culinary school if I hadn't tried it.
Yeah. Then goes back to your decision-making process where, like, again, if it's that old adage of follow your passion, well, I mean, there are constraints around that. There's practicalities around it too, where you have to still pay the bills, be able to get around. But at the same time, sometimes it's pursuing it and not necessarily to completion, but at least to say, okay, you know what, I gave it a fair shot. Wasn't what I thought, and but I'm still better off on that. So great experience. And obviously, you're not teaching abroad in China right now. So I love that you kind of filled in the blanks from there until now. Like, how did that transition came in? Because it sounds like, well, this is the way to live. This is how everything should be. So you would hope that you would continue down that path forever. So what changed or what was different along that path?
Oh, we would. And then my daughter was born. So we had my daughter Sloan in China towards the end of our contract, and we thought she's the first grandchild on our side, and let's come back to Canada for a year and see what happens. And if things work out, we'll stay there. If not, then we'll come back and go teaching abroad. It's hard when you have a little one because it's easy to teach abroad when your kids are in school age because then they can go to the school. But otherwise, you're paying half of your person's salary to go. And so it's not really an ideal thing for one of us to be teaching, the other one to be sitting at home in China or Singapore or wherever. It's not the fulfilling life we're looking for. So we knew we wanted to come back for a little bit just to see how it goes. And then it was interesting because we were both looking for work. There were no teaching jobs in Ontario at the time. It's still really highly competitive. And, one of the things I always tell students about networking is it's not about just networking with, people outside of school or outside your MBA program or whatever, is that your peers are your network. We came back and it had been 3 months of not having any luck finding a job. And my wife ran into someone at Starbucks that she was on a student club with 13 years earlier at Western. And I was like, oh my gosh, Erin, how you doing? I haven't seen you. And they were talking and, letting know her circumstances and saying, oh, you're looking for work? Well, I remember being on this student club with you. I remember how intelligent you are and your work ethic and your integrity. Like, let's have a meeting. We're looking for someone on our team. And that's where she's been for the last 10 years. So really want to emphasize the importance of building that network internally, like with your classmates and the people around you, not just out there, because they will be with you through your whole entire career.
For sure. It's definitely one where the network, whenever you kind of been in the trenches and go through the battles, and school is a great case of that, or like your first jobs and this and that, stay connected with those folks, because 10 years down the road, who knows, right? If they remember you, it's like, oh yeah, it's like no time has passed and I would love to have you join. Obviously, if you were a good friend to them, the ones that you were less so, maybe not as much, but obviously go back there and apologize and repair that relationship so that maybe you can thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what happened to me. So someone that I knew from Korea that was back in Toronto was working for a company called Teach-Away, which was recruiting teachers to teach overseas. And she said, hey, you're perfect for this. You are a teacher. You've taught overseas. Come and learn, the education side of it, the travel side of it. And now I can learn some of that recruitment business side as well as I worked for this company for a number of years. And so that's how I sort of transitioned back to work in Canada. And then we all of a sudden had 2 children. And as any parent will tell you, your perspective changes a little bit. My wife and I are so grateful for our time traveling, and we desperately want to go. We talk about it all the time. It's always there. But you start to think about what's good for our kids and what community do they want to be a part of, and and the grandparents and those family things. So it's a decision that's always on our minds. But of course, now both of us are doing great things in our own professional lives. So it's tough to walk away from that as well. So I spent some time at Teach-Away, and then there was a ex-colleague of mine, again, someone in my network, who was working at CP Ontario, and said, Sean, you're a pretty good public speaker. There's a role at CP Ontario you might be really interested in. I thought, I don't know much about CP Ontario. Let's go and check it out, right? You always take the meeting, and they talked about a role in which I could really, develop some of the skills I wanted to in terms of networking and event planning and delivery and public speaking. And I thought, what the heck? Let's go and do it. And I'm so glad that I did, because from there, everything really just transformed over the last 6 years. It was just an absolute, catalyst for learning development, connections, and career growth that was probably the best decision professionally that I ever made.
That's awesome. And it sounds like it's still teaching, but just in a different package, in a different way, educating young folks as well. And obviously, there's still way more to come because there's still a lot to look forward to. And I'd love if you kind of go back and share some of the SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier that you give to young Sean at any points in your career. I know you already shared a bunch of them.
Yeah.
If there are any that you want to like reemphasize or any new ones that you haven't mentioned, what are some of the SWIKE that you would share?
Absolutely. I would say that what you are worried about other people thinking about you, they're not thinking it, and they don't care. People are so burdened with the busyness of their own lives that they are not concerned with that, awkward thing you said 6 weeks ago that you've been thinking about constantly. It is like, let it go. And I think that if I could tell them, I would say, you don't have to worry about having your life planned out and your 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan when you're 18. It's just, God forbid that whatever you have planned at 18 actually works out, because then you've really missed out. There's just no way you can learn everything in life. And so you just don't know what you don't know. And you need to go, I tell students, like, if you're thinking about a career path, you would never go to a restaurant without looking at the reviews. What are people saying about it? And would I like it too? Well, this is your career. So there's so many different types of jobs. What are you doing to go and meet and talk to people? And so that's what I would have done. I knew about teaching career. So, sure, I knew a couple of teachers, but there's so many jobs now that I realized that I would have loved, but I never talked to. Like, maybe I would have been a good firefighter. Like, I should have gone and talked to one and say, hey, is it actually that hard? And what's it like? And what's your day to day? And what do you find challenging? And if I want to apply, how do I get into that? It's these, we talk to so many people around what influenced your career, because I have a lot of these conversations on your end as the facilitator. And they just talk about these serendipitous conversations, these magical moments where I was getting my winter tires changed, and I talked to someone that was in fintech, and I didn't know that was a thing. And now I had this coffee chat, and I've got this career in fintech. So, there's so many serendipitous moments that, I would go back and say, like, just go and talk to people and have those conversations and ask them about who they are. Be more curious. Don't make assumptions. I think, as much as I was very proud of the person that I became, there was an element of overconfidence there too, of thinking, oh, I've got to figure it out. I've got my job, Maple Leaf. I've dated this great girl. Like, I'm good for now. And I think that my advice to young people is, it's okay to have a direction. It's okay to think, I know I want to maybe head towards this way and be open about this, but don't make assumptions that you think you know everything and that you know the value of different career paths. Be open-minded and don't put so much pressure on yourself. The hard part is you have family members and aunts and cousins saying, what are you doing with your life? Especially these business school students that I talk to, it's so stressful. And I think I was 40 when I found my dream job. So, keep trusting your gut and be open-minded. And otherwise you risk getting trapped, and you risk putting all your eggs in one basket, and you're afraid to leave and pivot because you've told everyone that I'm committed to this career path. You need to be committed to a life of growth mindset and of learning and taking risks. The other thing I would tell myself, I wish I knew then, is just how much moments of struggle and moments of failure would be the most important moments in my life. They would build the foundations. They would build the resiliency. They would build the skills and the new perspectives that I needed to be happy, because without them, people always ask, the people that know me well from high school, they go, don't you wish you could go back and do it all over again? I said, no, all of it made me who I am today. And I'm grateful for that. So I wish I knew then just how valuable that stuff was, how important it was, because maybe it would help me take more risks, take more risks and take them earlier.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of great life lessons. What I took from that is, there's probably an expression like, you need pressure to make a diamond, right? Yeah. So sometimes the struggles are the most important. And there's one, I think, by Jim Rohn, where he says something like, don't wish life were easier, wish you were stronger or better. Something like that, right? So that can be something that the folks take away, because life will be challenging no matter what you do. So you might as well make them interesting challenges for you to overcome and have interesting experiences along the way. Another one is kind of the directionality, right? Plans are nice, but plans can go awry, right? Like you put things in the GPS and there's traffic, there's construction, there's this and that. So be prepared for like the little detours, the longer detours, and maybe you take the scenic routes for a couple of years off to Korea, China, or whatever, and then you come back, and then maybe you go again, and all that sort of stuff. But having that open mind instead of being so myopic with that direction as well, and that you're super focused and not willing to see all these other opportunities, I think is a great part. And part of it was the network, right? The relationships, because those can be gold in terms of future opportunities and areas that you want to explore. But in order to get that, you often have to get away from yourself and not be so worried about what other people think, because there'll be other folks that they'll love you for who you are and be kind of your best cheerleaders. And there'll be a bunch of other ones, right? Like you can't get rid of the haters and stuff like that. And what comes to mind is there's a quote, you could be the sweetest, ripest, juiciest peach, but there's always someone out there who doesn't like peaches, right? So those types of things are the ones that kind of speak out to me based on what you said. So is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that there have also been times in my life where I was wanting to do the least amount of effort possible, like a natural enjoyment of laziness. And for the last few years in my role at CPA Ontario, and a bit more, and when I was teaching too, I'll say this, but the times where I was the most challenged, where I really tried to stretch, where I really tried to work as hard as I could, and try to do as many new things as I could. Those were the most rewarding times. So I wish I could go back and tell myself that the times where you're really, really working the hardest, where you really are stretching, that feeling of growth and that feeling of stretching and that feeling of I can do this now, I can do this now, I can do this now, is the best feeling you're ever going to have. And the alternative to that motionlessness, that listlessness, that languishing, which may feel comfortable for a few minutes, will eventually be a nightmare.
Yeah, a good point and a great place to end off this podcast. We'll hopefully have you back and deep dive into a couple of topics as well. But if folks are looking to reach out to you, where can they find you? And what are some like future aspirations that we can look forward to hearing about in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Sean, SEAN, Mullin, MULLIN. You can also email me at smullin@CPA Ontario if you want to connect with me there. But by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn. And so right now, my aspiration is to be a full-time public speaker, to be a workshop leader, to be a coach. The work I've done at CPA Ontario, presented a small opportunity to do that. And I found a real passion for it. So I've actually built it into the program. We weren't actually doing this in our role before. And now our whole team is doing that. And we're developing all kinds of workshops to add extra value to students. And so, having a sense of, when I was a teachaway and I was kind of looking for other work, I was kind of limited. I'm like, well, I'm not an HR professional, and there wasn't a lot of pathway for me. But then in this current role, I've built so many people in my network, and there's so many different types of avenues that I've actually turned down a lot of opportunities because I thought, no, I don't want to go into recruitment. I don't want to go into admissions. I don't want to go into academic advising because I feel like there's something here. I'm most happiest when I'm when I'm facilitating learning and I'm coaching students and I'm helping them. And so I've been sticking with this because there's a quote by Amy Cuddy says, "Fake it until you become it." And so I've been kind of doing that, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now I'm known to be this speaker around campuses. And so I connected with a company called Skills Camp that was looking for someone to do this freelance. And so now I'm doing it freelance. I've been doing that for 2 years. So the ultimate goal will eventually possibly do this on my own, as my own business or working freelance with different organizations. And I'm on my way doing that already. So trust your gut, stick with the system, and it may take some time, but things are going to happen. Say yes to opportunities, volunteer, embrace the growth mindset, and you'll be amazed what happens.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Sean, for sharing your swag and your words of wisdom. And hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Thanks so much, Luki. Thank you, everyone.
There.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.